Feel happy and relaxed by reliving your favorite vacation moments by painting them. This image is of the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and I'll go over building depth and atmosphere, composition, and color. Come on and meet me in the studio. So, I'm going to do a quick painting in the same style I would do plein air, kind of quick, spontaneous, but I am in the studio. As you see, we do have some interest right in the middle, which I would normally not pick something that had the interest right in the middle. However, this particular photograph has a whole lot going on that draws your eye around. So we have this whole movement coming in from the side, going up there, and then coming into the center. We also have this way off in the distance, that rock formation. We have the clouds going on up here. So there's a lot more interest in this photograph than just that clump of tree right there in the center. In fact, I will probably break that up a little bit so it's not such a dark clump, because I'm an artist and I can do that. That's artistic license. You can change things a little bit if it helps your composition. I bought this pre-made 8x10 panel, and now I'm taping the edges just so I don't get paint on that. Who knows, I may end up painting it, but I might just stain the edges or leave them raw. Just keeping my options open. Okay, I'm sealing the top of it with just white acrylic paint. And I'm using a smaller brush because I want it to be textured. I want some of those rough brush strokes in there just to add a little texture to the top of the wood. Here's my palette. You can pause on that if you want to see it up close. And today I'm just using some cheap brushes. I've got really nice brushes. But I keep ruining stuff and having to throw them away. It's so bad. I get interrupted. I keep thinking, oh, I'll get back to it, and then I get interrupted. With a little bit of vine charcoal, I am just quickly doing a sketch, and in fact, some of it proved not to be terribly accurate, so I changed it with my paint. As I'm putting the paint on and blocking in color, I can tell when things aren't quite matching up. But it does help me familiarize myself with the composition. Okay, so in the sky, I'm adding that little bit of yellow mixed with white because those clouds should glow. You don't really see that there's yellow in that, but there's a hint of yellow. Now, the final painting will not be that yellow, but some of that will glow through the cloud, and that's really important that you have some of that warm yellow that comes through your clouds. If you've ever been in an airplane, you know that just above those clouds you have bright sunshine. And some of that warmth does come through the clouds. So you need to have a little bit of the yellow in there to make the sky seem realistic. And later I will come in and put, some layers of cool white. White is a cool color on its own. So I'll be putting some white over those clouds and building that back up, but letting some of that yellow glow through. You'll find that if you'll do that in your skies, your sky will become much more lively than if you are just using cool colors. Just kind of blocking in purples and blues. I've got ultramarine, I've got violet, and the white that I'm mixing together. Now, since this is a very cloudy day and some of those clouds are thick, I'm actually even using a touch of Prussian blue where those clouds are darkest. In that area, I'm using Prussian blue mixed with a little bit of the other colors. I come back later and I lighten that up a little bit. Now, way off in the distance, those are mountains, and you can just barely see them in the photograph. But I know that they're there, so I made them a little bit more prominent. As you lay in your background, often you'll have to adjust those colors. You, of course, want things furthest away to be the lightest and have the least amount of contrast. And I've just found that sometimes as I'm coming forward, slight adjustments need to be made to the background, which is why I don't go all in on all the detail as I'm doing it, because I know, sometimes those changes need to be made. I'm just waking up my screen. I know I need to change that where it never goes to sleep. So now I'm just kind of laying in that. One thing to keep in mind, my photograph, and often your photographs, will sometimes come out being much more contrasty. The darks may be a little too dark. I am not a photographer, and when I get into these situations, I just, a lot of times, even though I've got a really nice camera, I do point and shoot, and instead of really taking the time to set up the shot. So, I know from memory that it was not that high contrast. I could have changed that in Photoshop prior to showing it to you here, but for me it's just a reference shot, and I make a lot of those changes as I'm painting. I don't need the reference shot to be perfect. I just need it to remind me of what was there. So just kind of blocking in some of the pine trees in the background, just little dabs of color. Things change. One thing I've noticed, I've got my setup, I have the LED lights pointed to the ceiling, and I am getting some reflections on the wet paint that kind of lighten the color a little bit more than it actually is. I noticed that when I was trying to really darken in later on the dark colors in the foreground. Okay, laying in some of the rocks, still blocking in the color, balancing warms and cools. Now, if you've been out west, one of the things that's so interesting about the brightly colored rocks, you get a lot of reflective color. So see how that looks really warm even though it's in shadow? That's how a lot of the rocks are. You know, I'll cool it down, but there's still going to be a lot of, you know, warm, reflective light in those shadowed areas. Kind of just jumping all around, trying to get the background blocked in. And making little adjustments to my drawing because I could tell it was, it was a little bit off. So as I'm doing that, I'm looking at reference points. I'm looking at, one big boulder next to another boulder, how those things line up. And that's how you end up with a more accurate drawing. Sometimes you're looking at light space and dark space. There's a lot of ways to compare objects in order to get an accurate representation. Little adjustments get made along the way. It actually would have made an interesting composition even without the tree in the foreground. But maybe another time. This place was just so spectacular. I highly recommend going to the north rim of the Grand Canyon. The lodge is gorgeous. There are real log cabins that you can rent. There's plenty of other places that you can rent within the national park and outside the national park. We actually stayed right outside the national park. And because we didn't book in time, we kind of do these trips by the seat of our pants. And anyway, it usually works out. We didn't have to stay in the national park. We were just in the area for a day. But I highly recommend the North Rim. I've been to the South Rim too, and I love it. A lot more tourists. The North Rim is heavily treed and just gorgeous. It's actually, I think, 1,000 feet higher in elevation than the South Rim. We were visiting several national parks on this trip, so didn't have a whole lot of time to spend in each one. This next year, my husband and I are starting our travel adventure, and we will have more time to spend in each park. And I'll be able to paint on location. That's good and bad. Then I'll have to deal with the wind and the sun. Painting outdoors, it sounds wonderfully romantic, but yeah, it has its challenges. So here, just again, balancing the warms and cools, making sure I have the elements in place, because I really loved that kind of the spiral that is in the composition. from the path. I'm starting to lay in the tree. I'm working with very, very wet paint. So that's sometimes a challenge because yeah, I noticed in those pine trees I had to bring in that much darker, higher quality paint because it's more pigmented, and in order to get some of those rich, deep greens and browns in there. I did not bring in black. I was tempted to, but instead used a very deep Vasari Van Dyke brown, and that pretty much did the trick. So there's that tree. I'm spreading out the foliage a little bit more so it doesn't look like such a ball. Adding a few more darks back there, emphasizing the layers of the rocks. Tomorrow I'll look at that again and see if I need to punch a little bit more color in there. Building depth in the dirt trail. Now, even though the North Rim is a lot less touristed than the South Rim, on some of these photographs I did have to kind of wait for people to get out of the way, just to get my own person in there. You could just eliminate other people, you know, in Photoshop or whatever software you use. On the final one, I've noticed that I need to go in and do tiny little retouches. Not crazy about the hat. You know, it's so tiny. I'm going to have to actually paint around the hat to get it to be the shape that I want it. But I'm letting it dry a little bit before I attempt to do that. A little bit darker shadows. And the sculptural dead wood out west is so interesting that it's definitely worth including in your compositions. I'm lightening up that mountain range in the background, the canyon walls in the background, just because I want that other sculptural rock formation to come forward a little bit more. I just thought it needed to have a little bit more depth in there. Now, one thing I'm doing, I've actually flipped my brush over. I'm using the hard plastic point of my brush, and that's how I've signed my name into the wet paint. And I'm doing I'm scratching in little branches and details with it. This painting took less than 2 hours. Of course, I have sped it up for you quite a bit. And tomorrow I will take a look at it again and make little alterations. Oh, look at my hands. I gotta go wash my hands and make dinner. The reflection from the lighting is not showing how dark some of those pine trees in the foreground are. So, and some of the other areas, there's actually more contrast in this than it's showing because it's reflecting light on the wet paint. I hope that you have enjoyed this and that you'll visit the Grand Canyon. Thanks so much for joining me for this lesson. I hope you really got something out of it. You could help me to continue to give you free content by clicking that like button below and hitting the subscribe button so artzXpress will be easy to find in your subscription list. Also comment. I'd love to start a conversation. Have a great day. Bye.